Imagine a world map. Now imagine someone taking that map, ripping it into pieces, and throwing them into the air. When the pieces land, they form a completely new picture. New countries appear, old empires vanish. The lines that divide nations are redrawn in blood and sacrifice. This is what happened in the 20th century. Two enormous wars, World War I and World War II, engulfed the planet. They were not just battles between armies, they were total wars that involved everyone. This is the story of how our modern world was born. At the dawn of the 20th century, Europe was a continent simmering with tension. It was like a forest filled with dry wood, just waiting for a single spark. Four big ideas were pushing Europe towards a cliff edge: nationalism, imperialism, militarism, and a tangled web of alliances. The spark finally flew on the 28th of June 1914. In the city of Sarajevo, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated by a young Serbian nationalist. The dominoes had started to fall, and within weeks the great powers of Europe were marching to war. When the war began, most people thought it would be over by Christmas. But that dream quickly turned into a nightmare of trench warfare. For 4 long years, millions of soldiers lived and died in these trenches, separated by a deadly stretch called no man's land. This was a new kind of industrial warfare. The machine gun could mow down hundreds of men in minutes, making traditional infantry charges suicidal. Poison gas was one of the most feared weapons of the war, causing horrific injuries and a slow, agonizing death. At the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, the guns on the Western Front finally fell silent. The Great War was over. The Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh terms on Germany, forcing them to accept full blame and pay crippling reparations. This deep resentment would poison German politics for years to come. The 2 decades after World War I were shaken by the Great Depression. In this climate of fear, people were drawn to charismatic leaders who promised simple solutions. Most ominously, in Germany, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party rose from obscurity, feeding on public anger over the Treaty of Versailles. On 1 September 1939, German tanks and planes stormed across the Polish border. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war. World War II had begun. World War II was even more of a global conflict, spanning from the frozen steppes of Russia to the vast expanses of the Pacific Ocean. Germany unleashed Blitzkrieg, lightning war, using fast-moving tanks and dive bombers to smash through enemy lines. On 7 December 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, bringing the United States into the war. The Battle of Stalingrad was a turning point. After months of savage fighting, an entire German army was surrounded and forced to surrender. In the Pacific, the Battle of Midway saw the US Navy sink 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, crippling Japan's naval air power. On 6 June 1944 D-Day, over 150,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy, in the largest amphibious invasion in history. President Truman chose to use the atomic bomb. On 6 August, Hiroshima was destroyed, followed by Nagasaki. Japan surrendered on 15 August 1945. As Allied troops liberated the concentration camps, the full horror of the Holocaust was revealed. 6 million Jews murdered in an industrial-scale genocide. In 1945, 50 countries created the United Nations, dedicated to maintaining peace and promoting human rights. The world wars redrew the map, toppled empires, and introduced nuclear weapons. Remembering these wars is a vital lesson and a solemn promise to always strive for peace.